everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and I like to talk about books, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of December. If you've been keeping up with my wrap-ups and this series of tackling my insane physical TBR, that all started when I posted my first video showing every book I have on my physical TBR, which was over 100 books and freaked me out a lot. Then, in November, I ended up with 119 books left on my physical TBR. And I said at the end of that video that my goal was to get that number down to 100 by the end of the year. Spoiler alert, I didn't do that. I think I made the number go higher. But we'll just deal with all the numbers at the end because that can get a little bit confusing. So I'll start by telling you about all the books that I read this month. So the first book that I read in December was In a Holidaze by Christina. This is actually one of the books on my latest set of 5-star predictions. So I'm not supposed to tell you what I think about this book. I'm supposed to wait until I do my reaction video to all of those 5-star predictions. But so far, this is the only 5-star prediction I've read, and I feel like it's gonna be a while before I get to all the other ones. So I'll just go ahead and let you know. Plus, this is a seasonal book, so it's not going to be exciting to hear about this book in like February. Unfortunately, this was not a 5-star read for me. This was a very weak 2-star read, maybe even like a 1.75 if we want to be really picky. I really thought this was going to be a 5-star read, not because I love Christina Lauren's books necessarily all the time, but because of the concept of this one. It was going to be this time loop Christmas story where this woman has this weird thing happen to her when she is on this family vacation for Christmas. It's multiple families that come together and celebrate Christmas together at this cabin each year. She has something weird happen to her, and then she wishes that life would show her how she'll be happy, and then she ends up getting stuck in this time loop where she relives this vacation over and over again, and then it's a love story at the same time. So I thought that sounded really interesting and exciting. I love when there's stuff with time loops or just anything weird with time in general, or like answering life's big questions about what will make me happy. Can you just show me what to do life? And this book did not do anything to fulfill all the potential that it had. It ended up being so boring. It really did not utilize the time loop enough. The characters were super flat and stale and boring and uninteresting. The love story was not convincing or interesting. The third act big tension moment that makes the couple break up that always happens in a romance was so stupid. It just really let me down on all accounts. It really was not very good. It wasn't even that Christmassy, and looking at this you would think it would be a pretty Christmassy book, and it really wasn't. So overall it was just a pretty big letdown. I haven't really heard many people say good things about this. I think a lot of people feel pretty similarly and were pretty disappointed with this one. Next, I read Layla by Colleen Hoover, and I was super excited for this one, as I usually am with new Colleen Hoover books. This one was going to be her first paranormal suspense thriller romance thing going on, a big mishmash of a bunch of different weird things happening, something super different for Colleen, and I think this book really delivered well. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. I thought it was super interesting. It really kept me interested in the story the whole time. I was flipping through it really, really quickly. The characters were interesting. The way you develop emotions around certain characters is interesting, and the people that you're rooting for and not rooting for, and it really makes you think. It's just really, really weird, and I liked it. I will say this wasn't a complete 5-star for me because there are moments where you really, really have to suspend your disbelief to stay invested in the story, and I had to like intentionally tell myself like, okay, it's just a story, like go with it. Otherwise, you really could hate things that happen in this book. So if you're willing to suspend your disbelief for a really interesting, wild, fun time with a Colleen Hoover paranormal romance, then I would highly recommend you give this a try because it was a ton of fun. Next, I read Check Please Volume 2. This is the second and final installment in this graphic novel series about this boy who goes to college and plays hockey and has a sort of coming of age story in the first one, and then in the second one develops a romantic relationship with a fellow hockey player. I really didn't think I was going to enjoy these books. I thought they were going to be too cheesy for me, but I have like a weird love for them. There's like a weird place in my heart that this just warms, and they're so cozy and they're so cute, and I really enjoy the art style of them. They're sort of like more comic-y than some of the graphic novels that I read that are a little more like trying to be artsy. This one's more like comic characters. I don't even know how to describe that, but Overall, it was a good time. I definitely enjoyed this one more than the first one because I came for the romance and I didn't realize the first one wasn't gonna have a ton of romance in it. So this one gave me everything that I was looking for, and it was just a really good read for the winter season. It's just a nice cozy read for some reason. Next up, we have a book I was highly anticipating, and that is The Midnight Library by Haig. So many people have been talking about this book, and hearing the description of this book, I thought this was going to be the perfect book for me. I love weird time stuff or weird like examinations of the meaning of life. This is a story about a woman who is not in the best place in life, not in the best mental health. There are definitely trigger warnings for self-harm, suicidal ideation, and suicide because this book opens with her deciding that she wants to kill herself. After she does that, she ends up in this place in between life and death that is called the Midnight Library. So it is literally a library with all these books, and her elementary school librarian is there as well. And each book contains a different possibility for how her life could have gone had she made a choice differently. So in this book, you get to follow her exploring different paths her life could have gone down, exploring her regrets and possibilities in her life, trying to fulfill some feeling of hope or meaning in her life again as she is stuck in this in-between period between life and death. I really enjoyed the concept of this book. I enjoy most of what happened in this book and like the outline and the bones of this book, but overall it was just like missing something to really resonate with me. I just feel like this is a style of story that I read a lot, and I'm like seeking out these types of stories a lot, so I have a lot to compare it to. So maybe if you didn't read a lot of stuff like this, then you wouldn't have as much to compare it to and you would think this was awesome and amazing and a 5-star read. But for me, this was more of just like a 3-star read. I feel like I've read books that have done things like this better and more interesting and have more interesting dynamics with other characters. I felt like this was just missing that next layer of character depth for everyone and interactions between the characters and interesting dynamics. But that's just me being pretty critical. I still overall think this was a good story. I do still recommend this book. I do still like this book, and I like what this book did differently from others as well that do still make it stand out. And I also really like this cover. I got this from the UK, so I could have the UK edition because I like this better than the one in the US. Next, I was in the mood for a thriller, so I read People Like Her by Ellery Lloyd, which is actually a pseudonym for a couple that lives in London. They're a writing team. They're named Colette Lyons and Paul Velitos. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Didn't realize that until I was like done with the book and got to this back page. But this is a story about an influencer, and she is like a mommy blogger and displays her life as like chaos organized sort of thing, like, oh, I'm just like you, I also have to deal with my baby vomiting on me and stuff and blah blah blah, but it's all like really organized to look that way so that she can gain a following and continue to grow in her influencerhood. Meanwhile, there is someone that is like stalking this influencer, and you get portions of the book from their perspective as well, but you don't know who it is, and that's the whole mystery as they close in on doing something to harm this influencer and her husband and daughter. You don't know why or who it is or what their motives are, and you try to figure that out along the way. Admittedly, I didn't expect a ton in this book going into it. I am not really attracted in the whole influencer thriller story right now. It's not the most compelling idea to me, so I wasn't expecting this to be like a great thriller or anything, but I was really let down by it. I ended up only giving this 2 stars, and I think this would have been way better if the book would have started where it ended. So instead of giving us all this first like 85% of the book, if it literally the story started right here and then that's where the story kicked off, I think it would have been a much stronger story. So that's really all I can explain without giving spoilers to this book, and it literally like just came out, so I know people probably don't want to hear too many of those spoilers, but maybe a little later I will give more information on this if you guys are curious to hear more about my opinions on it. But overall, I just was really bored. I thought it was really slow. They missed a lot of good opportunity in organizing the story in a better way to make it more thrilling and exciting and more of a mystery that you're really interested in reading. And I really had to push through this last half to actually finish it because I almost DNF'd it. So yeah, definitely not for me, but let me know if you want to hear more of my spoilery thoughts and I can fit that in somewhere at some time. Next up, I read The Cousins by Karen M. McManus. This actually was not on my physical TBR at first. I was highly anticipating this book. I talked about it as one of my most anticipated December book releases, but I was just planning on listening to this on the Libby app as an audiobook that I had through my library. And then this came as an extra book in the Illumicrate box this month. So it has nice sprayed edges and a cool cover. I don't know, this is the UK paperback edition, so I don't know what the original looks like, if it's the same as this or if this gold foil or something is different, but I was really excited to get this in the box because I was already listening to it on audiobook, so it was awesome just to have the physical copy in my hand as well. And I really enjoyed this story. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I don't read a ton of young adult mysteries or thrillers right now. That's something I would like to try to get into, but I just have these preconceived notions that I'm not going to like them as much as adult thrillers and mysteries, so I've typically stayed away from them. I get One of Us is Lying, which isn't the main book series by this author, recommended to me a lot, and I haven't picked it up yet. So I wanted to read this book to test out this author before I go into this book series of hers. Now I'm gonna do it because I really liked this book. It wasn't super special. It didn't blow me away in any new or particularly interesting ways, but I just had a really fun time reading it. I think my expectations were probably lowered because it was a young adult story, and so I wasn't expecting things to be as complex or dark or interesting, and then it was complex, dark, and interesting. So that was all really surprising and was really fun time. I did think this book was going to have a little more atmosphere to it, since it is about these cousins who their parents have all been disowned or disinherited by the grandma, and so now there's cut ties, and the grandma invites the grandchildren, who are the cousins, to come back home to the island that she lives on and work at the resort that she owns for the summer. And they don't know why, it's really mysterious, but the parents are excited because they're oh, maybe we can get back in the will and you can reestablish these connections with our mother. And so all the cousins end up going and working. There were just some really surprising things that happened in this book. Every twist surprised me. There was a twist kind of earlier in the story that shocked me and I thought was really interesting and exciting. I feel like I'm trying to justify why I like this book, but I don't really have to justify it. I just liked it. Even though it was a young adult mystery, I still enjoyed it. So now I'll be picking up more of these and I would highly recommend this one. Next up, I was still in the thriller mood, and so I picked up Pretty Little Wife by Darby Kane. This is actually also a pseudonym, which I didn't know until I was almost done with the book and ended up taking a look. I thought this was a debut novel because I've never heard of Darby Kane, and I thought I remembered seeing something that said this was a debut, but this is actually a pseudonym for an author who is an award-winning romantic suspense author and a former trial attorney as well. I looked up who the author was, so you can look it up if you want. I believe her name was Helen something, Helen McKay, McDonald, something like that. Not anyone I'd ever heard of before, but once I found that out after finishing this book, it made a lot of things about the book make sense. And some of the areas that I thought it was maybe a little cheesy or lacking, I understand if this is from an author who typically writes romantic suspense, how it translated into this domestic adult thriller. But all that being said, I really actually enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars and I don't have too many complaints. I don't want to give away too much of what this book is about because it is a thriller and I think it's usually best to not know a lot, and the synopsis of this book is a little bit cryptic, so it's not super obvious what happens. But basically this is a story where a husband goes missing, and at the same time, there are 3 other girls in the town who have gone missing, and they're wondering if it's possibly connected. And the wife has some interesting things about her and her background. There's a podcast element. There's just a lot of things kind of going on, but it's kind of like the typical domestic thriller of wife goes missing and they think the husband did it, but flipped because husband goes missing and they think the wife did it. The main character in this book sort of reminded me of the main character in, I can't remember what it's called, but whatever Samantha Downing's latest novel is. It reminded me of the main character from that novel, who I think is also probably similar to the main character in Samantha Downing's first novel, which I haven't read yet, but based on the synopsis of that, sounds kind of similar, where they are sort of a villain character, and the way that the reader gets information about them is interesting. And yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but I really liked that. I really liked the characters in this book. I thought it was interesting and fresh and new. This was a definite page turner. I could not stop flipping through the pages. The font is pretty big too on this edition, so that really helps get through quickly, and you feel like you're flipping the pages a lot, and then you really want to finish the story to see what's going on. There's really short chapters, and some of them, not all of them, but like a lot of them end with like a cliffhanger or some sort of suspense element that makes you want to keep reading, because the next scene goes somewhere else in the story and you like want to get back to what you were just reading to figure out what's going on. It was just really exciting and everything I'm really looking for in a thriller to keep me engaged in the story and surprise me the whole time. The reason this is not a 5-star is it was a little cheesy. Like, it was written a little bit cheesy, and just the general writing overall was not as like polished as I'm used to. There were a lot of like choppy sentences and like periods and places there shouldn't be, and the dialogue, like I said, it was just like a little bit cheesy, and some of the relationships the characters were having weren't totally convincing to me. Like, they start immediately suspecting the wife, which is not common in thrillers. Like, when you're reading a domestic thriller, usually the wife goes missing and the husband is the main suspect, and because there's all these cases where all these women have gone missing and it's been their husband that does it, it's like a no-brainer. Like, you always suspect the husband first. But when the husband goes missing, it's not necessarily a no-brainer to suspect the wife, at least in my opinion and from like stuff I've read or the crime documentaries I've watched. So I needed like a little more convincing into why they would suspect her, instead of just like immediately suspecting her and narrowing in on her and focusing on her and going so hard on her. So that was another way it read a little bit cheesy to me. But like I said, this is from an author who doesn't typically write like adult thrillers, so I wasn't like super surprised to see that, but I thought this was great, and this author's got a lot of potential. So if you're looking for a fun, fast-paced thriller, this one was pretty exciting. Next up, I read Are You Listening by Tillie Walden. This is a graphic novel about a road trip. It is so hard to explain because I'm kind of not sure what I read. I ended up only giving this 2 stars because it just was disjointed and confusing, and I don't really get it. And sometimes when that happens, I think I was the problem. Like, maybe something about the way I read it, like I'm being dull and just missing something or not paying enough attention. But then I was reading other reviews for this book on Goodreads, and a lot of people have that same conclusion, that they're like, what the heck did I just read? And people either love or hate that, and it didn't like work for me in this story. I will say I really enjoyed the artwork. It is very spooky and dark and creepy and like wintry, and it kind of reminds me of the artwork in The Lolo Woods by Carmen Maria Machado, which that graphic novel I did love. Basically what's happening here is there's this character B, who is this teenage girl who is running away from home, and she gets picked up by Lou, who is this slightly older woman. She's 27, who is just like, they know each other in the town somehow, and she invites B in the car, and then they go on this road trip together through Texas. They end up picking up this cat. There are these men trying to hunt them down at some point because they have this cat. It doesn't really like resolve anywhere. I don't know. It was just really, really weird. And I think that's kind of what Tillie Walden's stories are typically like from what I was seeing of other books of theirs. But yeah, I don't know. I really like the artwork, but the story, I was just like, man, that was strange. Like, kind of like watching an episode of The Twilight Zone. I don't know. It was weird. And then lastly, I read I Would Leave Me If I Could by Halsey. This is her new poetry book that just came out. And I don't read a ton of poetry. The only poetry I've read this year is Lana Del Rey's poetry book. So as you can tell, I am interested in these singers, and they were all of a sudden coming out with these poetry books. I was like, I'll pick it up to see what they're doing because I like them. I actually like Halsey more. I like more of Halsey's music than Lana Del Rey's, so I was expecting to maybe like this more, but I don't know. I don't even know how to compare them. They're so different. And the Lana Del Rey one, I listened to an audiobook, whereas this one was a physical copy, so very different experiences. Anyway, basically all that to say, don't trust my opinion on this because I don't know anything about poetry. I've read 2 poetry collections this year, and they're from singers who decided to release poetry. So I ended up just giving this like 3 stars. I don't know. It was like good at some points. Other poems, I just read it and then was kind of done with it and moved on. There are some really haunting images is in this. Like, she does a lot of stuff sort of like body horror, which was really interesting to read from her, that is really guttural and visceral and creep me out. And then there were other ones that were really sad and cover things like sexual assault, and there were some that you could tell were more personal to her and like more of telling a story of things that had happened to her rather than being like an artsy poem. So it was kind of a collection of a lot of different types of things. I'll tell you like my favorite poems in here if you're interested. My favorites were the introduction, I Met a Mind Reader, The Professional, Watermelon, 8, Hereditary, The Painter, Fun Girl, 16 Missed Calls, A Story Like Mine, and Parasite. But yeah, other than that, I don't really have like a ton of thoughts on it. I just don't know enough about poetry to have thoughts, but it was okay. And then I also read 2 audiobooks this month. So the first one was Confessions on the 745 by Lisa Unger. I think I've read one other book by Lisa Unger in the past. There are a lot of thriller authors named Lisa, so I get them confused a lot. There's like Lisa Jewell, Lisa Gardner, Lisa Unger. So I don't know, maybe I've read something from Lisa Unger before, but this was a 2020 release that I've heard some things about, saw some buzz about it, so I was interested in it, so I just picked it up on audiobook. It is kind of like a Strangers on the Train story. So it is about these 2 women who start talking on a train, and one of them starts talking about how she thinks her husband's cheating on her with the housekeeper that she has, and then the other one starts telling her about how she's sleeping with her boss, and so they start like bonding over that information, just kind of one of those weird stranger conversations you have. And then a couple days later, the one whose husband is sleeping with the nanny, her nanny goes missing, and from there the mystery starts exploding. I would say I mostly enjoyed this one. It was pretty much just like a decent average thriller for me, so I'm glad I didn't purchase it. I'm glad I just did it on audiobook, but it was a fun enough time. I think the main thing with this story is it just aims to confuse you and keep you confused most of the time, so you're like trying to piece everything together, which is a little bit annoying and not my favorite thing. This book also does the whole like one person having multiple names thing, which I also hate. And it also has like messy family drama, which I also hate. So it sounds like something I would hate, but I actually didn't mind it. I gave it 3 stars. It was fast enough pace for me. It kept me engaged enough. I was enjoying the characters and their dynamics and trying to figure out what was going on. So yeah, it's like a weird one for me to recommend because it's one that you would think I wouldn't like, but I thought it was fine. And then the second audiobook I listened to was The Searcher by Tana French. I was pretty excited for this book to come out. I've seen it at like the top of thriller list for like the top thrillers of 2020, so I thought this was gonna be great. I've read one other book by Tana French before, In the Woods or Into the Woods, which was the first book of her Dublin Murder Squad mysteries. I never continued with them though. I really enjoyed Tana French's style, how she does like the grit and the grime. And I don't usually like love detective stories, but I just like the way hers come across. They're just really dark and interesting to me out of the whole one book that I've read from her before. But anyway, all that to say, I thought this was gonna be a pretty good book. Like I was like, okay, Tana French is coming out with a new book. This is gonna be a hard hitter. And I DNF'd this book at 25% because I was so utterly bored, I could not continue any longer. I tried so hard. I was listening to this book for like as long as I possibly could, and I kept thinking like, okay, I've gotta be like really far into it by now. It must be time for me to DNF. And then I would check and I was only 10% into the story. And then I would listen to a lot more and I was like, okay, I've listened to a lot more and nothing's happened. Like I feel like it's a good time to DNF. And I was like 15% into the story. And I just told myself if I got 25% in and still wasn't enjoying it, then it was gonna be time to DNF. And I listened to that whole first 25% and nothing freaking happened. It was just so much writing to say so little. Like it felt like 5 pages of words to say our main character, it was a cop and he moved to this new town. Like that is everything you uncover in like 5 pages of text. It was just so slow, so boring. I could not get into it. I honestly don't even remember what the story's supposed to be about because nothing was happening. It's something about like this American guy who was a cop who moves to Ireland to go live a simple life, but then ends up getting swept up in this mystery that's going on there of like people disappearing or like a teenage boy disappearing, and then he gets involved in that and discovers that it's not like the most quiet, calm town that he thought it would be. Oh my gosh, it was so boring. If you've read that book, please let me know. Did it get better? I'm not gonna finish it. I just want to know. Okay, now we can talk about the numbers. So I read 9 books off of my physical TBR this month. So that would bring my number down to 110. However, 4 of the books that I read this month are also books that I added to my physical TBR this month. So these would all just cancel each other out anyway, and that brings our number back up to 114. On top of that, I added 11 new books to my physical TBR, whether those were books that I purchased or books that were gifted to me for Christmas. So the number is now up to 125. So we ended up actually going up this month instead of down, which is not what I wanted, not what I anticipated. I tried really hard to not buy books this month since it was the end of the year, and I just wanted to prioritize the books I haven't gotten to yet, but I failed pretty miserably on that front, but it's okay. We're just gonna forgive ourselves because self-care is important. It's been a pretty terrible year, so if buying books is what's gonna make me happy and make 2020 a good year to close out, then whatever, I don't care. My number went up. Whatever, we'll work harder next time. So I'll quickly show you the 11 books that I added to my physical TBR. The first one is Little Women. I have wanted to read this classic for a while, and I just think this edition is so stunning, so I definitely wanted to own this. I thought it was gonna be a good winter read, but you know, didn't get to it. Maybe soon. Next, I added Migrations. This is a book that I have wanted to read all year, and it is fairly short, so I mean, there's still one more day in the year. Maybe I could squeeze it in, but I probably won't. This is about a woman who moves to Greenland to study the migration pattern of these birds or something. I don't know, it just sounds really beautiful, and I really wanted to read it this year. Didn't get to it. We'll get to it soon. I also have a couple of books that I've gotten through my Illumicrate subscription. So I have The Ravens, which is just so stunning. Can we just talk about that for a second? And then The Once and Future Witches, which is also stunning. Both of these are stories about witches, so do I sense a reading vlog coming soon? Maybe. Next, I got The Wife Upstairs. This is a Jane Eyre retelling in a thriller. Haven't read Jane Eyre, do want to read it soon, but everyone has said really, really good things about this, so definitely wanted this and will be reading this very, very soon, probably in January. And if you couldn't tell, I have been in a very thriller mood lately, so I also got His and Hers by Alice Feeney. I haven't read anything by Alice Feeney, but I've heard really good things about this book in particular, so wanted to give it a shot. These 2 books I got as gifts, so I got The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodora Goss and Plain Bad Heroines, both of which I've heard amazing, amazing things about. Plain Bad Heroines sounds like exactly my type of book, so I'm super excited for this one. And honestly, this one sounds like exactly my type of book too, so I'm also excited for this one. And then the other books are scattered about, so I don't want to go grab them, but I also got Green Glass House, which I am currently reading, but I'm just probably not going to be able to finish by the end of the year. I'm just not like insanely invested in it. It is a middle grade mystery, so I'm not like dying to turn the pages. I'm just kind of slowly getting through that one. Then I also got Tender is the Flesh, which I hope to be reading for Winterween, which comes up the first week of January. And then I also got Taryn Fisher's new book, The Wrong Family, which just came out this past Tuesday, and I'm thinking about doing a reading vlog for just that book, so let me know if that's something you would be interested in, because The Wives was such a disaster last year that I'm interested to see if this will be better or another disaster. So like I said, that brings my number back up to 125. I also just know I need to do an unhaul soon, but there's only one day left in this month, and just thinking practically, like that probably won't happen in the next day. So I am planning to do a pretty big unhaul, which should help get this number down as well. I've just had to accept that my reading tastes have changed since the time that I have gotten a lot of these books. So I just need to let them go and let them move on into the hands of other readers who will enjoy them more. So let me know also if that is something you would be interested in seeing a video of. I've never filmed an unhaul before. I just kind of do it on my own because I don't really know what to say when I'm just getting rid of books. They're pretty much all the same of, I don't want this book anymore, so I'm getting rid of it. So yeah, let me know if that's something you're interested in and I can give it a go. But we have reached the end of this video, so I will quickly tell you the 2 highlights that I had this month were Layla and Pretty Little Wife. If I had to recommend any of these books to you, these are the 2 that I would say were a lot of fun this month. this one, even though it wasn't like the best written, it was definitely a page turner that kept me super engaged. And Layla is just a book that is truly different from anything else I've ever read before. It's even very different from Verity, which is the thriller that Colleen Hoover wrote before. So definitely would recommend reading this one. If you've been interested in Colleen Hoover, I would give this one a chance because it was a wild time. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.